There was this analogy that someone posted on Twitter which said that being an Indian on the internet is the modern day equivalent of being a Jew in 1940s Germany. And I immediately agreed with it. Actually, not just agree, I actually related to it. Indians are easily one of the top 3 most hated ethnicities in the world, if not the most. And as an Indian creator who caters to an extremely diverse and wide audience, I am no stranger to hate. In fact, it never affected me or bothered me because being in this business for more than half a decade gives you a lot of thick skin. Until now. There was this one comment I read that flipped a switch. It said, Indian culture is an absolute scam. It's just myth and marketing. You guys have absolutely no culture or no influence in the global market whatsoever. And at first glance, I immediately disagreed with it because in Indian schools, you're taught that India is actually extremely diverse and one of the most cultural places in the world. In fact, India should have been called the cultural capital of the world instead of New York or London. But then when I decided to retrospect, introspect, and step out of my house, I discovered something very shocking. I looked at myself first. The content that I was filming was with the help of an iPhone, an American device. The PS5, which is easily the most loved device in my home, is Japanese. The shirt that I have on right now is from China. In fact, even the underwear that I'm wearing was manufactured by Jockey, an American company. And I thought to myself, wait, this is not really our culture. We don't really have any influence. In fact, we are the influenced. And it got worse when I stepped out of my house. I went to a mall and the first store that I was greeted by was a Starbucks. The second one was Swarovski. The third one was Tissot. When I went to the food court, it was no different. The first thing that I saw was burgers. The second thing was pizzas. I literally counted and noticed that out of the 20 stores, only 2 of them sold any Indian cuisine. And what was even more shocking was that here, every single person wore jeans. Maybe we don't have a culture anymore. Maybe we're just importers of culture. Maybe we are the influenced. Maybe the only real cultural influence that exists in the world is of the West. But despite my observations, I was still unable to agree with that comment. I mean, what's the point if I agree with him, right? I wanted to prove that person wrong. And these were just my observations, which are clearly not enough. The sample size is just 1. And you're not here for claims, you're here for data. So let's understand with the help of just that, whether Indian culture is actually a scam. And regardless of which country you're from, please watch this video till the end because I did some digging and I, being an Indian, discovered so many things about this country that the world absolutely has zero idea about. Let's say you're someone who's never been to the country and you've only consumed content about it through a medium like YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. Then if I ask you, what is your perception of India, you would probably think of 2 things. Firstly, it's obvious, the Taj Mahal. And secondly, extremely shady street food vendors. And you would say that India doesn't really have any real influence over the world. And on the other end, if you ask an Indian what has been the cultural impact of India over the rest of the world, they would probably be clueless. But what if I told you our colonizer, Britain's national dish was chicken tikka masala, an Indian dish? Okay, let's face it, there's no such thing as a national dish anywhere, and this was probably just a bunch of Indians trying to make themselves feel relevant. But if you dig deeper, you would find something interesting. Nearly 10,000 of the 88,000 restaurants in the UK were Indian. That's 11.4% of the entire restaurant market. But come on, that's just cuisines. How does that gauge culture and influence? After all, Japan has French restaurants, France has Japanese restaurants, Britain also has Turkish restaurants. So we might as well look at some more meaningful data. If I were to ask you, what do people do more? Stream music on a service like Spotify, Apple Music, or YouTube? Or perform yoga? Well, the answer is obvious. They stream music because every single person has a phone and we listen to music every single day. But despite that, yoga as an industry was more than double the size of the global music streaming industry. In fact, yoga was bigger than electric two-wheelers. And that's not even all. Nearly 17% of the US population, that's approximately 1 in 5 people, actually practiced yoga. Now, when I read this, I was just as skeptical as the person who commented that thing, so I questioned this too. This is just one thing of the many that India may need to crack in order to have any real cultural impact and influence in other countries. But then look at this data. Ayurveda, which is basically medicines and herbs manufactured based on India's ancient text, were an $8.2 billion market in the US and Europe. And to understand the scale of this was bigger than India, Japan, China, Korea and the entire Asia Pacific domestic market for Ayurveda combined. The Ayurvedic turmeric market in the US is so crazy right now that back in 2013, its annual sales revenue was just $25 million and in 8 years it grew to $151 million. As a result, the Ayurveda market in the US is set to grow at 27% annually. That's 3 times the average annual growth rate of the US stock market. Now the layman would say, how is this not influence? But I am no layman. I was affected by that comment and I wanted to be skeptical and analyze everything. After all, yoga or a bunch of herbs that may or may not work isn't really influence. It becomes even more difficult to prove that India has had any real influence over the world when you look at the fact that there aren't as many Indians living outside of India. For instance, look at the US. Only 1.5% of the entire country's population is actually Indian. But despite that, they own 60% of all hotels. They run more than 10% of all Fortune 500 companies. They pay 6% of all the tax revenues in the country. And if you look at the data for the income distribution by ethnicity in the United States, then guess who comes out on top? If you look at the percentage of people with a bachelor's degree or above in the US, you would see that 70% of Indians there had a bachelor's degree or above. This was more than double the national average of just 28%. The median income in the US as of 2023 was about $40,000, but Indians in the US on average earned more than $145,000, and all that without any white privilege. You know how we look at cultural influence through the lens of cinema? Well, for instance, Robert Downey Jr. or Tom Cruise are huge in India, which makes it look like we are importers of this culture. But so many of our movies grossed more overseas than they did back home. For instance, China was a huge market for Indian movies. 63% of the total box office collection for Amir Khan's Dangal came from China and not India. What's even more random is that the Tamil superstar Rajnikant, that we lovingly refer to as Talaiva, which means leader, is also called that in one of the most unexpected countries. A country that is unilingual and closed off from pretty much the entire world, Japan. When Talaivar's movie Muthu was dubbed in Japan in 1998, it grossed 400 million yen in Japan and became an instant hit.
俺は人の知らない間にスーッと現れて、ここぞという時はいつもちゃんとそこにいるのさ。
So big that so many Japanese people actually created fan clubs for Rajnikant. After this point, they started premiering many of his movies and so many fans started visiting India just to see him or catch the first show of his movie when it came out. This was kind of an advent for Indian filmmaking because they started growing at enormous speeds in the Southeast Asian markets. To the extent that in 2022, the Telugu movie RRR broke Muthu's record in Japan, and when it was re-released for a screening in 2024, the tickets sold out in 60 seconds. So frankly, there is all the evidence across so many dimensions that Indian culture was successfully exported to different parts of the world, and maybe it's time that the West actually recognized it and learned something from it. I'll tell you what I mean from my own experience. Last year when I got upgraded to Hilton Hotel's Gold membership, which is by the way an American hotel chain, they touted 2 free water bottles every single day during your stay as a feature. In India, rooms that started as low as 1,000 rupees or maybe $12 to $13 a day give you as much free bottled water as you want. I didn't understand why free water was such a big deal when I got upgraded, but as I traveled more, I discovered that hotels across the world are nowhere close to Indian hospitality. Let alone give you free water, they don't even help you with your luggage when you check in. Contrast that to a Hilton equivalent in India, Taj. Not only do you get free water every single day, you get fresh fruits, cookies and chocolates when you check in, and the moment you enter the hotel, this happens.
Yes, of course. Okay. Thank you so much.
I'm not making this up. Indian hospitality is so extra that if you happen to stay at a Taj property, you can actually call the reception when you're about to check out to have them send someone over to your room to help you pack your stuff. Why? Because in the hospitality business here, not only do we give a shit about the guest, we actually go above and beyond for them. While making this video, I discovered that Indian society has westernized to a great extent, but so many other societies got Indianized. And it's not like all we have done is just import culture. We've exported it and we've also stayed true to our own. The more I observe, the more I notice the hundreds of temples, gurudwaras, mosques that exist around me and hide in plain sight. I notice myself complaining that India is crowded or noisy, but every time I see the processions during Ganesh Chaturthi and the joy on people's faces and the even more beautiful Murti of Ganpati Bappa in that beautiful lighting, it's all worth it. The comment I received and the way it made me think and the things it made me observe showed me that I was nothing but ignorant. We actually have so much of culture and influence that we have exported around the world. But if I hadn't done the reading necessary to create this video, I might have just ended up perceiving Indians as nothing more than wannabe Westerners trying to import whatever culture they can find. There's absolutely so many things wrong with India. There is so many challenges to overcome, so many problems to fix. But despite that, there are actually so many positives that we overlook only because the hate is so prominent on the internet. It seems to be growing every single second. The next time you feel sorry about being brown on the internet, just realize one thing: you and your people are way more important than you think.